Okay, so now we've found out a bit more about you guys, we'll move on. So who are we and why are we running this webinar? So Arts at the Old Fire Station is an arts organisation based in the centre of Oxford. We run a theatre with a programme full of events and performances throughout the year. We have a shop, a bar, we have a gallery and artist studios, dance classes and workshops, and we co-produce an arts festival. We produce a social enterprising festival, as well as our own theatre productions and exhibitions. And we also share our building with the homelessness charity Crisis. We work really closely with Crisis to engage people facing tough times in what we do. So whether that's free tickets to see theatre, volunteering as an usher to work alongside our front of house team, or a traineeship working alongside our staff to learn how to run an arts organisation. So that covers things like marketing, to finance, to curating, and lots more. And we also run projects, so much like Icon, where people facing tough times are involved at every stage of producing an exhibition or theatre production, which is then open to the public. So through this, they work alongside professionals in the industry to learn new skills and to build their resilience and confidence to move away from homelessness. And it's really important to us to be able to record and evaluate the impact this work has on the individuals that we work with. So that's a quick précis on us, but there is more information on our website and in the document that we sent out to you before today. But again, any questions at all, please do pop them in the chat. So why are we running this session? We certainly do not pretend to be experts on this methodology. Today is all about us sharing what we've learned through the process of doing it. We aren't academics and we aren't professional evaluators. We are an arts organisation trying to evaluate what we do as we go along, and this is us sharing how we do that. We're only able to do what we do because we get really substantial support through trusts and foundations, and clearly we have to evidence the impact of this support and of our work so that we can report on this funding and learn for the future. So with the help of our external evaluators, Liz Firth and Anne Perry, we did what most people do. We tried to learn how to count numbers and activities of people, using forms to fill in to measure impact. But we found this deeply unsatisfactory because we didn't always believe the numbers that we were getting, and we found the process of asking people to fill in a form completely undermined our relationship with them and also the project itself. So then, brilliantly, Liz and Anne offered us a different way of evaluating through storytelling based on the most significant change methodology. And that is what Sarah is going to talk to us about in more detail. So with Anne's support, we've been working this out as we go along, and we know lots of people across the world have used this in lots of different ways to learn. So we don't pretend for a minute that we are experts. However, we do feel like we've stumbled across a way of learning and understanding which is also enjoyable and creative, which is now becoming a crucial part of what we do as an organisation. So we're now in our 5th process of storytelling in the midst of COVID, and we've been asked by a number of people to share about how we use this methodology. So today is about us sharing that. It is certainly not about us telling you what the right thing to do is. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah now, who leads on this for us. So Sarah is the inclusion manager at Arts at the Old Fire Station, which means her day-to-day job is to support the organisation to include people facing tough times in all aspects of our work, as well as how we learn and evaluate as an organisation. So Sarah's going to take you through the main headlines in the guide that you received, and she's also going to tell us about the experience of doing it and why it matters. Okay, so thank you, Sarah. I'll hand over to you now.
There we go. Thank you, Megan, and thanks for the introduction to the Old Fire Station and to storytelling and to what the shape of this webinar will be. Looking at those polls, it's amazing to have people here from so many different spheres and perspectives, all interested in storytelling. And I feel particularly aware that right now there's lots of people talking about storytelling and collecting stories in relation to COVID-19. So I really hope that this might be useful and timely in relation to that activity that's going on. So as Megan said, over the course of this presentation, I'll be talking a bit about what storytelling is at the old fire station, why it matters, and how we use it. In doing that, I won't be going into the minutiae of every single step in the process, because a lot of that detail is included in the guide itself. Instead, I'll be focusing more on what's been our experience of storytelling. How does it feel? How does it look? And as part of that, we'll be hearing from various people that have been involved in the process. So that'll include Simon, who's one of our story collectors, Liam, who's been a storyteller with us, and Renata, who's one of our story editors as well. So I'll start by explaining a bit about what is the storytelling methodology at the old fire station. So storytelling is rooted in change methodology, which is also known as monitoring without indicators. And it's used a lot in international development circles and also in asset-based community development work. And at its core, it's about collecting stories from participants about what's been the most significant change for them, and then interpreting these stories in a participatory way, which really tries to understand what do these stories tell us about change and how did that change happen. One of the things that really distinguishes most significant change from more conventional approaches to monitoring is that it doesn't determine quantitative indicators in advance. Instead, it lets the participants, as the storytellers, decide what's been the most significant change for them. Now, most significant change, it's particularly good for capturing change that's unexpected, that's emergent, personalised or diverse, and for understanding how that change happens. So this is the basis of storytelling at the old fire station. And this is what it looks like for us. So we have a team of volunteer story collectors who are made up of staff, of artists, volunteer ushers, and crisis members. And just to explain what I mean by crisis members, so as Megan said, we share our building with the homeless charity Crisis. So crisis members are people that come to Crisis for support because they're either experiencing homelessness or they're vulnerably housed. So our team includes crisis members. This team of story collectors, they meet with a storyteller individually. And our storytellers are all people who participated in the project or the activity that's being evaluated. And for us at the old fire station, in the past, this has included artists, it's included staff, crisis members and volunteers. So the teller and the collector, they have a conversation in which the teller talks about, what's changed for them as part of being involved in this activity or the project. How did that happen? Why is it important? And what's really key is that this conversation, it should feel like a conversation. It shouldn't feel like an interview. So this conversation that they have, it's recorded, it's transcribed, and it's then edited down by a writer into a 1 to 2 page story. And it's really important that that story tries to capture the voice of the storyteller and the insights and the things that they've shared. We then, once we've collected all of these stories, we hold a discussion day. So the discussion day, it brings together a group of people, all with different relationships to the project and to the old fire station. And they read the stories, they discuss them, and they think about what are the themes, what's the learning emerging from these stories, and what does it mean for our work at the old fire station. And then the final thing that we do is that we, based on what comes out of this discussion day, we write a report, and we also share these stories publicly. And we've been doing more kind of creative things with the stories as well in the way that we share them. So this is what storytelling looks like for us at the old fire station. As Megan said at the start, it's been a huge step up from the previous methodologies we've used in the past that involved form filling. And And these are some of the aspects of it which we found to be particularly, that really resonated with us and have been really important. So the first one is that, rather than us determining outcomes and what impact looks like, it means that the participants themselves tell us what change looks like and feels like and is for them personally. And that feels really important in redressing some of the power imbalances that we've experienced with other evaluation approaches in the past. Secondly, it's more holistic. So, it looks to understand change and how it happens and where it sits within the wider context of a person and their life. And for that reason, it just feels a bit more human. It also, it allows for different personalized and diverse outcomes to emerge that, otherwise might be things that wouldn't have been recognized or captured in the evaluation process. It's really importantly, it's enjoyable and meaningful, and that's something that people involved throughout the process tell us. Whether they're tellers or collectors or editors or transcribers. And this is to the extent that some of the story collectors say that if we were to ask them what's been the most significant change for them while they've been at the Old Fire Station, they would say storytelling and using the most significant change methodology itself. And then the final thing is that it's collaborative. So at every stage in the process, it involves different people from across the organisation and beyond. And this means that learning, it's not something that that's engaged with by management or by by me who's leading on learning. It's something that everybody participates in and is reflecting on and involved with. So how have we used storytelling in practice? What does it look like? So as Megan said, we're now in our kind of 5th go at using the storytelling methodology. We first used it in 2017 to help us understand what impact the being involved with the Old Fire Station have on staff, crisis members, artists, trustees, volunteers and audience members. And we've since used it in relation to our creative projects, including Our Place, which was a visual arts project in 2018, and the Icon photography project last year. Most recently, we've also used it, an amended version of it externally. So we did a much more shorter project around systems change with the Lankelly Chase Foundation last year. And we're also in the midst of this story collecting process with Oxford Together at the moment. So to give you a bit of a feel for how storytelling looks in practice, I will explain a couple of these in a bit more detail. But the first 3 in particular, you can find a lot more information about on our website. All the stories and the reports are there as well. So Icon, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it was a collaborative photography project that was run between the Old Fire Station and Crisis. It was led by the photographer Rory Carnegie, who is in a picture on the left somewhere. And Rory worked in collaboration with Crisis members to recreate a series of iconic British photographs, like the one you see on the second cover there. And when Icon happened, throughout the process, there was a lot of buzz about Icon, and there was this real sense in the building that, it was a special project and that it really meant something. But the question was, how do we understand, what did it mean to people on an individual level, and what was it about the project that made it feel special and made it work? And storytelling was what we used to try and help us unpick and reflect and think a bit more deeply about that. So we collected 11 stories. These included stories from artists, from Crisis members, from Old Fire Station staff, and from Crisis staff as well. And on the slide there's a couple of excerpts from some of the stories alongside some of the photographs. So I'll just give you a moment to read those and be quiet. So once we collected these, all of these stories, we then held, as we mentioned, a discussion day. So, and at this discussion day, we looked at the stories and we thought about, okay, what are some of the themes emerging around what changed for people as a result of taking part in this project. And these were some of the things that they mentioned. So people spoke about how through the project they collaborated, they felt a part of something, they discovered new things about themselves, they developed creatively, they developed skills, they made connections, developed confidence, felt a sense of pride, they felt able to move forward with things, and really importantly, they had fun as well. And then we also thought about, okay, looking at these stories, what are people telling us about how this happened and why it happened? And some of the things that came out that, it was that the project had high expectations of people. People felt valued as part of a team, that hierarchies were broken down, that people learned through doing, that the project was flexible, but that it also had structure, that people were able to engage in different ways with the project, and that people felt supported throughout. And as I've said, with ICON, you can, the best way to get a sense of the stories and the project is to go to our website, where you can see all of those things alongside the report there. So the second project I'll speak about is Oxford Together, because it's one which is very fresh in my brain because we're right in the midst of it at the moment. So this is a storytelling project that we're running in partnership with Oxford Hub, in which we're collecting the stories of people who've been involved in Oxford Together, which is Oxford's community response to COVID-19. And this has involved collecting stories from volunteers, from staff, recipients of services, partners from Oxford City Council, with the aim of capturing the voices and the experiences of people during this time, and particularly the change they've experienced, in the hope that these stories can play a part in informing how we work in the future, and that the learning around this experience in this time is really captured. Now this storytelling project has been the biggest leap so far for us, perhaps. It's involved us working, with an external partner using storytelling in relation to work that's beyond the scope of our own projects, in our own building. It's involved us collecting and trying to build relationships with people over Zoom and over the phone, which presents its own challenges. It's also meant, we've had to do it in a much more accelerated way, because we really want the learning and the voices in these stories to come into discussions, at a time when they could really influence what's next for Oxford. So we're still working on this project, and we'll be sharing the stories and the learning that comes out from it in the months to come. So this is our relationship with storytelling so far. And each time we've used it, we've learned more about what works, what doesn't work, and we're very much still experimenting and learning as we go. But as Megan suggested in her introduction, storytelling in and of itself has been a significant change for the old fire station. It shifted evaluation from being this add-on at the periphery of our projects to something that's really become very focal and a big part of who we are and what we do. I'm really aware, particularly from that poll at the start, that on this call we have people from whose interests and perspective on storytelling spans learning, comms, the arts, interest maybe in amplifying voice as well. And for us, storytelling, it starts from a place of learning, but it's actually enriched all of those other areas as well. So in terms of communications, it feels like it enables us to really bring people's voices to the fore in a way that feels real and engaging and more human. And in terms of creativity, it's really, we found the process of telling stories is creative in and of itself. And there's also a huge amount of creative potential in the stories that we collect, which is another thing that we're trying to explore more as well. Now, all of this, it isn't to say that we think storytelling's necessarily perfect or that it's always the right methodology. And it also isn't to say that, we don't still count numbers, because we do, and we still think that's important. It's just about what you're counting and not overstating for us what those numbers represent and can say. But as I've mentioned, there's still lots we want to question and explore and experiment with around storytelling. In particular, what methodology sits alongside storytelling to capture the things that didn't change? How can we use storytelling, in a group context? What's a quicker way of using this process? And what more can we be doing creatively with the stories that we collect? So I'm now going to speak a bit more about the practicalities of how we do storytelling, and some of the things I speak about in the guide itself. So the guide, it talks about 7 key steps to storytelling, which are on the slide here. And before I go into those, I think it's really important to emphasize that, while we've put together what is, in many respects, a how-to guide to storytelling, it's very much more than a sum of its parts. And what's really key to making it work is that at each stage in the process, we're always thinking about collaboration, about relationships, and about the responsibility that comes with collecting people's stories. And this is actually what underpins the whole process. And without that, it doesn't work. So I'll now speak kind of first of all about the first 3 of those steps, which kind of culminate the collecting process itself. So as I've mentioned, at the Old Fire Station, we've recruited a team of story collectors. They are Justine, AJ, Simon, and Steve, and they are staff, volunteers, and artists, and previous crisis members. Most of them managed to be more than one of those things, and some of them managed to be all of those things at once. And their job essentially is to guide a conversation which is anchored by 4 questions. Those questions are, what did you do on the project? What changed? Why was that change important? And what were the main things that enabled that change to happen? Now, this very much isn't a script. Each story collector approaches collecting very differently. No 2 story collecting conversations look the same. And that's because, what's really crucial in this process is that this is not an interview, it's a conversation. And it should feel equal, and it should feel relaxed, and it should feel like it's on the teller's terms. Now, within this, we found the types of conversations that really help us to hear and hear impact and understand change are those that are, first of all, personal. So it should be about their own experience and opinions, not the change that they see in others, which is often easier to talk about. It should be detailed, so we want to hear the specifics and the descriptions. It should be focused, so we want to hear change that they feel is attributed, at least in part, to the project or the activity we're talking about. And it should be positive. And what we mean by positive is that, we're not in these conversations asking people to tell us about everything that's happened in their past. We're not mining for those kind of stories. The conversation really sits in the place of talking about change and how things have moved forward and what's moved forward in that respect. But it's not to say people talk about things that aren't positive. That's just not what the focus of the conversation is about. So while in many respects, it shouldn't be overcomplicated, and it is the simplest thing in the world. It's a conversation between 2 people. It's something we all do every day. At the same time, doing it with the right tone, and it takes skill and it takes sensitivity. And I think, you know, we're incredibly lucky to have a team of brilliant story collectors. And I think some of the skills that they really bring to it that are important are that, first of all, they're really good listeners. Secondly, you know, they're genuinely interested in people's stories. They're able to put people at ease and build relationships and rapport. They're very good at, you know, supporting people and holding that space. And they're also confident in guiding a conversation. And these things, I think, are all really key. In the guide itself, I go into more detail on, you know, what the training looks like, what support is available, you know, how to support story collectors, which is also all really important too. So yeah, worth looking at the guide for the details on that. So now we're going to hear from Simon, who is one of our story collectors, to tell us a bit about his experience of collecting stories with the old fire station. So I'll hand over to Simon.
Oh, hello. Thanks very much indeed, Sarah. I should just say that I am a volunteer at Arts at the old fire station. I don't do any of the other things there. My usual role there is just to usher events and one or two other things, but mainly I do ushering of events. This is the fourth time I've been involved in story collection, and it's thoroughly rewarding. The things that make it so, the training was excellent. I think all of the collectors felt that by the time we actually came to do it, we had a very clear concept of what it was that we were being asked to do. And throughout the process, there's always been very, very good support. I am extremely mindful of the fact that it is, it's not an interview, it's not an interrogation. It really is just about collecting. And to that end, I think the most important thing that I do is switch the recorder on and hand it over at the end. But in between that, you know, my job is to enable the teller to tell their story. So, you know, and the things that I do to enable that to happen, I try and put the teller at their ease by telling them something about me, and I never switch on the recorder until I have their permission to do so. I try to adopt active listening techniques throughout, so that means I ask open questions, I feed back to the teller what they've told me in my own words, I ask for clarification, although in Zoom context, that's a bit more complicated, because if you cut across the teller, that really interferes with the quality of the transcript, which makes the transcriber's job really difficult. And they're not slow to let me know that. But nonetheless, you know, it's important that the teller doesn't assume any knowledge on my part, certainly. So I do need to get terms explained. I try and get the tellers to concentrate on specifics, you know, to tell me what they did, to concentrate on the nuts and bolts of what it is that they did, explain precisely what their activity has involved, and then from that they can move on to telling me about the changes that that's brought about for them. In context of Zoom, as I said, it's important not to cut across the teller, because that does make transcription very difficult. And one thing that I've found is very effective for me, I turn the self-image off because I find it otherwise distracting. And if I turn the self-image off, I can just, you know, concentrate on looking at the teller and, you know, demonstrating my interest in them. stories tend to last between 45 and 90 minutes. I have had a couple that have gone on longer than that, but I don't think anybody has dried up after a short period of time. I mean, the things I get out of it, I mean, I guess like lots of people, I just enjoy being told a story. It's just genuinely exciting when I switch the recorder on. The anticipation of what's coming. It's an enormous privilege to be invited to share in people's experiences. Some of them really are very transformational, and that's an extraordinary, moving and uplifting experience in some instances. I've learned a huge amount. You know, the wisdom of some of the tellers is, you know, has been very, very informative, enlightening. I've gained a knowledge of activities and life in Oxford that would otherwise not be available to me. It's also improved, well, not improved, but deepened and enriched my relationship with the arts of the old fire station. As I said, normally my role would be to scan tickets at theatre events and collect the glasses afterwards. But this has intensified my relationship with the organisation, an organisation which you know, I have come to have an enormous affection for, and much of that has, or in part, come through being invited to participate in this. And I suppose in the current round, it's been an opportunity to contribute something in lockdown. Otherwise, I mean, I'm sitting at home. I'm not as vulnerable as some, but more than others. And therefore, it's a way of getting out and being involved in something that's of value to the city and the organisation. Anyway, I'll stop there. If anybody's got any questions later on, I'd be very, very happy to answer them.
Brilliant, thank you, Simon. And we feel very lucky to have Simon as part of our story collecting team. I'm now going to move on to talk a bit about the storytellers. So, you know, at the old fire station, our storytellers, they've included staff, volunteers, artists and crisis members as well. And as I've mentioned in our current Oxford Together project, they include volunteers, beneficiaries of services and partner organisations. For both projects, it's been really important to include diverse perspectives and voices in the activity that's being evaluated. But, you know, I think who the storytellers are, you know, is really guided by what do you want to learn about, you know, whose perspectives needs to be heard as part of this, whose story needs to be told, and who's up for taking part and sharing their story. In the guide, we talk a lot more about some of the things that need to be taken into consideration when preparing the storyteller for sharing their story. And it's really important that there's clarity around the process and what's being asked of them, around you know, what will happen to their stories, around, you know, consent and confidentiality, and also the support which surrounds this that's available to them too. And when it comes to the storytelling session itself, you know, a lot of attention goes into making sure that both the teller and the collector feel comfortable and supported. And that's both physically and emotionally. So that includes things like welcome, thinking about the space, thinking about refreshments, about debriefs, and about the wider support that surrounds it too. I'm now going to hand over to Liam, who was one of the storytellers on the ICON project, to say a bit about what his experience was of telling his story and taking part in storytelling.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I found it all strange. I come from a therapeutic background, I'm a staff member at Crisis, and before I was at Crisis, I worked for 7 years in a therapeutic community. So day in, day out, I was hearing people's stories and people telling their stories through their version of their truth and their stories. And I sort of lost sight of everything, and that became normal. So when I started telling the story with Justine, I knew what I wanted to say, and I thought I was saying it, but with the prompts from Justine, it sort of made me expand it, and it got bigger. So I got a bigger picture of myself, of not only what I wanted to say, but what actually happened in me then, and how I felt. After I told the story, I was really reflective. I was really, really reflective. I reflect every day when I finish work. So on the days I spoke about, I'd already felt reflective. Then through telling the story, I pulled it apart a bit more, and it gave me a view into my working practice as well, and what that means to me and the members I work with. And then when it was written up and I had to read it, I've got a pretty distinct Northernish accent, and it made me smile. It was like some sort of magical thing. I read in the transcript and I could hear my voice, all the colloquialisms and everything. And it was like, I had to put it down a couple of times because I couldn't believe how well they captured my voice and how I sound. I mean, when it come to recording it, I found that really difficult. I found the recording of my story really difficult because I was reading it as if it was a story, but I had that connection with the feelings and the emotions, and how I was telling the story didn't match my feelings and emotions that I was aware of. So it took about an hour altogether of pulling the story apart and reading it and remembering where it was and how I felt when I told the story. And then also I had to pull apart how I felt telling the story, and was that the reality of how I actually was in the event, and get all that together. But it's left my working practice a lot better for this. There was little nuggets in there that I'd overlooked as a practitioner that I picked up on through telling the story and the prompts, and then from reading it back. And when I approached the member I was working with, I spoke about these and what was meaningful to me about the event that happened. There was that connection, and it did enhance our working and enabled us to work in a different sort of way. And I felt a bit of a charlatan as well, because I was a staff member, and it was about the Icon project, and that was about Crisis members being the stars and doing this and driving this forward. But I'm nosy by nature. So when it was all going off in the art rooms, I was nipping in and having a look what we were doing. And then I was sort of find myself diving into it a little bit. And it was that was the important part of the story I got as well, was the impact that the members had on me, where usually as a crisis worker, I think it's the impact I have on members' life and the direction and the support I give them and to enable them. But it was the other way around. And I didn't get that till after the story. I didn't get how much I actually gave to me from when I read the story. And I think reliving the emotion as well. I can remember the events. I can remember when somebody spoke to her mother spoke to them at the Icon speakeasy or whatever it was in the cafe, and the emotion I felt then. And then when I told the story, I felt the emotion. And when I read the story, I felt the emotion. And it was reliving that emotion. And it just made everything so powerful and real, and how important people's stories are to them. And their stories are important to other people. And that ripple effect a story can have, and how it builds up into a bigger picture. And it was just really warming, reliving these emotions and these feelings. I can waffle on. I can waffle on and go all over. I just like, as a human being, I found it very therapeutic for me. It helped me professionally. It helped me personally, and it definitely helped my relationship with the people I was working with. And it helped me. I stopped reading books for a long time, and it started me reading books again and reading stories again. So yeah, I found it really powerful.
Brilliant, thank you, Liam. That's so insightful, and yeah, just great to hear about. So I'm now going to speak a bit about, oh, I missed your slide. I'm now going to speak a bit about, so the storyteller, like Liam, and the story collector, like Simon, they meet and they have this conversation, and the story, it's recorded and it's transcribed. When in person, it's recorded on an audio device. And at the moment it's being recorded over Zoom and using telephone recorders as well, with something new we're experimenting with. These stories are then transcribed, and what's really key is that we capture all the pauses, all the repetitions, all the idiosyncrasies of voice Liam mentioned, that are what really in the end give the stories their texture. Now, I'm sure some of the transcribers that are in this Zoom can verify this can be quite a frustrating and long-winded process, and that where possible we outsource this work to others. So these transcriptions, they're then given to a story editor who edits them down into a 1 to 2 page story, which is careful to, first of all, faithfully reflect the teller's insights into impact and its significance for them. Secondly, to accurately keep the teller's voice in the story, so trying to tell it in their own words. And thirdly, to really, for the story to capture the reader's attention, because we want people to hear and to read these stories as well. Now, these transcripts, they can be long and circular and detailed, and it requires quite a lot of skill and care and sensitivity to do this well. And there's some really good guidance in the guide that was created by Anne Pirrie on how to approach this. But here, these are some of the guiding principles that we use to guide this work. So firstly, the story should bring out the thoughts and reflections specific to the key questions that are guiding the discussion. So what changed? How did it happen? Why is it important? They should focus on personal change. So it should be about the change that the person experiences themselves rather than the change they see in others, which is often easier to talk about. It should the story should focus on what change was meaningful for the teller themselves. And that might, for some people, it's something really big, and for others, it's something really small, but it's really about what they tell us mattered to them and was the impact for them. Details really important. So we need to hear enough information about, what happened, about context, about the impact, for the reader to really understand the story and the impact there. And as we've mentioned, it's also important that it contains real life texture. So that means details and examples and specifics, but it also means all the idiosyncrasies of voice, and sometimes it has a slightly kind of verbatim tone to it as well. So I'll give you a moment now just to read. This is an excerpt from one of the stories we collected on Icon, which gives a bit of a feel for how voice is kept within the story. Now, before I'm going to hand over now to one of our story editors, just quickly before I do that, something important that I forgot to mention is that it's really important that once these stories are edited, they go back to the storytellers for their approval. And that's the point at which, while people have consented to take part in a process and they've understood what will happen to their stories, we make it clear that, once you've told your story and it's been edited, you have a chance to look at it again and tell us anything that you think you want changed, anything that should be omitted, and it's not until the teller is happy with that story that we use it publicly. And in some instances, people have reached that point and they've said, actually, I don't want this story shared about me anymore. And so it's been removed from the process. And we make clear that that's completely fine. And that's just part of storytelling, is that sometimes happens. So now I'm going to hand over to Renata, who's one of our story editors, in the midst of the Oxford Together story telling process, and he's going to tell us a bit about what it's like editing the stories.
Hello there. Can you hear me, everybody? Yes, I hope so.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Yeah, so I'm quite new to this process of editing, but I'm not new to the Old Fire Station. I've been a writer there before on one of their Hidden Spires projects, and I mentor playwrights and I work in the theatre. So I'm always dealing with fiction. But this is a really interesting thing to be dealing with as a writer when you're dealing with fact. And these stories that have come in are very long, and they go in all sorts of circles, and they are very well handled, I can tell by the interviewers, in the sense that they're really eliciting all sorts of information from the people they're asking the questions to. The ones I'm looking at the moment are all to do with Oxford Together and how different volunteers have been going out into our city and how they've been helping and what they've been doing and what their experience of that has been like. And what I love about it, it's so fascinating, is that, you know, so often with evaluations, I'm very used to them from arts projects, you know, they are very predetermined outcomes that you're looking for. Like, you know, how many people did you reach and what happened, you know, how many people responded. And as has been said before, doing that on a piece of paper is just so tiresome and just gives you very little information. Whereas with these stories, you get things you would never have expected. And it's been fascinating, just as a citizen of Oxford for me, to see these experiences come in that have been so different. So for instance, there's been one professor who can't go out of his house because it would be dangerous for him to do so, but he's coordinated his whole street, and then that's led him to coordinating all sorts of things. And he's connected in so many ways he'd have never connected before, and seen a value in the city in a completely new way, for instance. Or there was a newly qualified social worker who he'd certainly done a lot in the city, but never actually in his own neighborhood, for instance, and got to know his own neighbors. And there was a Chinese student who was a research student, and it was fascinating to see how she didn't believe she had anything to offer Oxford. She didn't even know there was an Oxford, really. She operated totally within the university. And for her, it's obviously been a huge, meaningful process to see how she can, as a human being, offer her help. And they've all been doing different things. Some have been delivering goods to people, some have been phoning people, you know, just to make contact with lonely people, to find out what they need, that kind of thing. And anyway, it does come in all sorts of, when you've got the document in front of you, it can be anything from like 24 pages, 37 pages, and you've got to reduce it to 2 pages. And I suppose that's the hardest thing. And it's finding finding a narrative thread that would make sense to somebody who's not seen or read, you know, seen the document. So it's got to make sense, but at the same time, it's got to capture that voice. So you want to keep a lot of those little ways they say things very, you know, like Liam was saying, he loved hearing his own voice there. And so that's important. But on the other hand, you want to make it even clearer what they have to say than the way they may have said it, if that makes sense. And so you're trying to get rid of a few of the repetitions and or things that are getting in the way of what they actually want to say. And then you reorder it, really. I mean, sometimes it's best to start, of course, with something they said right towards the end, because that'll make it much clearer what they meant earlier on when they said such and such. So, you know, it's a real editing job, but it's a very creative job. I think it's a very interesting job to do, because in the end, you're trying to make something a bit like playwriting, I suppose, you're trying to make something really live, a character live on the page. Yeah, so it's been great, and it's still ongoing, and I'm sure there'll be much more to discover. It interests me that Sarah was just saying it will go back. I'm glad it will go back to the people who were interviewed in the first place, because I'm sure it must be quite a shock to see it reduced when you may feel, you know, there were things that you felt were more important than what I've picked up. But anyway, we'll see. We'll find out when the time comes. Is that okay, Sarah?
That's brilliant. Thank you, Renata. That's really useful, really insightful. So once we've got these edited stories, We then, as I mentioned, hold a discussion day with those stories. So this is where we bring together people to think about the stories and what we can learn from them, and how this learning can really help to develop our work going forward. This is a facilitated meeting, and it aims to allow space to kind of explore, you know, what's striking about these stories, what's surprising, what unexpected things are coming out of them, as well as discussing the stories in relation to specific Old Fire Station outcomes that we have. Now, this discussion day, you know, what's really key is that it's participative. So it aims to bring together people with different perspectives and relationships to both the project and the organisation. So this includes people who worked on the project and been involved in the storytelling process, as well as those that are completely new to either or both of these things. And at the Old Fire Station, our discussion days, they've been attended by Old Fire Station staff, crisis members, volunteers, story collectors, artists, trustees, partners, all of whom have different roles across our organisation or their organisation as well. Now, once we've had this discussion day, we then look at the learning that's coming out of the stories, and we write the reports. And in these reports, we're still careful to foreground the stories and the words of the storytellers within that. We also try and share the stories. We also share the stories creatively. So in the past, we've done this, as Liam mentioned, you know, for Icon, some of the storytellers and also some actors as well recorded some of the stories. We've also devised short pieces of theatre with the stories. And at the moment, we're exploring using the stories around Icon as creatively as part of the Icon touring exhibition as well. As I mentioned, this is something we're really keen to explore and look into more as well. So that's the storytelling process in a nutshell. There are many different stages and steps to it, as I've explained, but some of the key things I think it's really important to bear in mind throughout are these things. So first of all, that collaboration is key, and that it should be there, you know, it's for us throughout the process at every stage. Secondly, that, you know, it can help to consider storytelling not as an evaluation approach that's added on, but almost as a project in and of itself, which is what it's become for us with Oxford Together. And that's because, you know, it requires a lot of time and coordination and care around the support side of it. And I think that, you know, treating it in this way is what's enabled it to have, you know, such a kind of significance partly within the Old Fire Station. You know, thirdly, you know, throughout the process is always just to remember the responsibility that comes with collecting people's stories, and to be sensitive and respectful of that, and to really take care over those relationships with the storytellers. And then finally, we, you know, as I've mentioned, we have this brilliant team of story collectors, and they've been invaluable to the storytelling process and how it's evolved with the Old Fire Station. So bringing them into our thinking about you know, how it works, what doesn't work, and where it's going has been really important as well. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope it's given a good sense of storytelling and what it looks like for us and how we use it, and that it might help to spark other people's thinking about how it could be used or adapted, or, you know, thought about alongside the storytelling that you're doing within your own practice as well. So I'll hand back over to Megan now for the next stage of the webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, guys. That was really, really interesting. So if anyone has any questions at this point, don't forget to put them in the chat now. We've got lots of questions coming in already, so that's brilliant for the Q&A. So next, we're going to put you into breakout rooms. This is going to be done completely randomly and may take a few seconds to move you across, so just bear with us. You will be in the breakout room for about 10 minutes. Please start by introducing yourselves and talking through any reflections on what you've just heard and any questions that have come up that you would like to ask. You will get a notification to tell you when your time is nearly up, and that's when you can come back into the main webinar for the Q&A. Okay, so into breakout rooms. Brilliant. Okay, so for the sake of time, we will start with the Q&A. So I'm going to put out some questions from Sarah that have been coming through in the chat. Sorry if we don't get around to answering all of them. If time does run out and we don't get around to answering your question now, then we will go through all the questions, and any that aren't covered in the guide, we will write up the answers and send out to everyone after today. Okay, so first question, Sarah. We'll start off with a question that came through that was, what are the main challenges and hurdles you found in the process?
I think one of the big challenges is that it's quite a time-consuming process. So I think one of the challenges is how to make sure that the learning which comes out of the stories comes at a time that still doesn't feel too long after the project happened. So I think that's been one of the main challenges. And I think, just to give a sense of that, for ICON, from the collecting the stories to the report coming out was a 6-month process. And that's because there were delays and things in between, but it did take time. So that, I think that's one of the challenges. I also think there are challenges around, particularly at the moment when we do storytelling within the old fire station, it's within our own building. And therefore we have existing relationships with people. When it's with crisis members, we have crisis there as that kind of wider support network. When this is something we do with Oxford Together, it's with people that we're building new relationships to that aren't necessarily with quite the same support around them. So it's how to make sure that we're still supporting people in this, through this kind of evolving process as well. That's a very real challenge, I think, as well at the moment, that we're still thinking about how best to do.
Cool, thank you. So the next question is, why do you need an editor, and is there a danger of losing the unique voice of the storyteller by over-editing?
I think there is a risk, yes, and that's why I think it's a really delicate and sensitive process that needs an editor that understands, impact and participant voice and how to retain this. And it's often a conversation as well with the editor about refining these stories to make sure that isn't lost. It's not to say that, I think editing it's a real skill, but I also think it's something that, at the old fire station, our wider team were also trained in editing stories, and that worked well, and that, it's something that people can be trained in to do, but, it can be challenging. And I think the reason why we use an editor is because, what makes these stories really rich is that they are embedded in wider conversations, through which the teller is able to really think about what change means for them in their lives, and to go off on tangents. So often the transcripts that we get back, they're circular and they're messy and they're repetitive. So something has to be done to these transcripts to make them accessible to a reader. And we found that, anything longer than 1 to 2 pages, it's harder for people to engage with as a reader. But that's not to say that there's not other ways that you could use those transcripts to, to create a story of a slightly different shape and length as well.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah,
I totally agree. I waffle, and when I got the edited version, all the waffle were gone. All the smoke and mirrors was gone and everything. It was just a story. And I love picking holes. I said this in my breakout group. I love picking holes in things and playing devil's advocate, but I couldn't. It was the story that I wanted to tell without all the going round the roundabouts to try and express myself. They got exactly what I wanted to say. I was very impressed with it. Very impressed. Made me look good.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you, Liam. So next question. So someone's written in and said, sounds amazing but lengthy. How long does the whole process take?
So as I said, with ICON, it took about 6 months, that process. At the moment, but that's because we are, this is happening alongside other things going on. And it's because we collect the stories, then we transcribe them all, then we edit them all, then we share them all. At the moment, we're trying to do things in a slightly more accelerated way. So we are, while we're collecting, we are kind of also transcribing and editing and then hoping to share. So we're kind of doing all of those things at once. And that seems, that makes it more, there's a lot more work, but it really speeds up the process as well. So at the moment, it's taking, you know, from someone's story being collected to it being edited and ready to share, it's taking about 3 weeks. But that is with people who are ready to transcribe and ready to edit and working, you know, kind of in a very focused way on the project. I think if it's done alongside things, then if you're including all of those steps that we do, it's good to be realistic about the fact it takes, you know, at least I'd say 3 months is my experience of it.
Brilliant, thank you. So another really interesting question that came in was, are there specific questions that are asked each time? Is there a kind of standard questioning to this methodology?
So there are those 4 questions, they kind of anchor. So it's about, you know, what did you do on the project? What changed for you? What enabled to that change to happen, or and why was it important? They're the kind of 4 questions that structure the approach. For each, you know, they may be kind of amended and phrased slightly differently across every project, but there are 4 guiding questions, yeah, behind the methodology.
Brilliant. Thank you. So another question, how do you manage to capture the stories of those with a more shy personality and those who are less likely to, less about sharing about themselves and their experiences?
I think it's a good question. And I think, you know, a lot of, particularly when we've been working, you know, with crisis, you know, there's lots of things we think about to try and make storytelling something that people who are shyer and who might not want to tell their story, you know, feel they can participate in. And I think the first thing is how we introduce it. So, you know, when someone's shyer, it can be good to have somebody else that has an existing relationship explaining it to them. You know, in terms of the story and making sure that they fully understand what they're going into. In terms of the story collecting itself, I mean, Simon might have more to say on this, but, you know, I think, you know, we often spend a lot of time, sometimes the first, however long it takes for someone to feel relaxed and warmed up, is how we, you know, it is however long it takes. And so we allow for that in the time that we give to storytelling. And I think also we try and really do, like, in the guide, I talk about things like refreshments, and although they seem like small things, I think they're all really important because they're the little things that mean there's something else in it makes people feel welcome, but there's also something else in the room. People can pause and have a drink and a snack, or people can look at, and all of these things they do help to create the right tone. Yeah, so there's some of the things we do, but I think it's about being tailored and doing whatever you think is needed, you know, keep listening to that person and what they would need to feel comfortable as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Lots of people are interested to know more detail about the discussion day and how it works. So how is the discussion day facilitated and structured, and who is invited to come along?
So there's more detail on this in the guide itself. So the discussion day, it's structured so that, you know, it first of all, we talk about people speak in groups about what they found striking or surprising about the stories, and there's a conversation around that. We then turn to looking at specific Old Fire Station outcomes, and then we in groups so each group is given a different outcome, and in groups they discuss, you know, what do these stories say in relation to that specific outcome. And we do that a couple of times with different outcomes, and then there's further time at the end beyond that to have more of a conversation about what else is coming out as well. So that's the broad shape of it. But like I said, there's more information in the guide itself. And in terms of who comes, it's the really key is that it's a diverse range of voices in the room. So we want people that worked on the project, that participated. We also want people that didn't and know nothing about it and weren't involved in storytelling. And so it's important that it's people coming at it with fresh eyes and with very familiar eyes as well.
Brilliant, thank you. So this is a really good question. Do you think that by focusing on positive stories that you might end up having a bias on the impact of some projects?
I think that's a really valid thing that's I often think about with storytelling. I mean, there is a focus on the positive, and that's explicit in the methodology itself. It's about change. It's about what worked. It's about what enabled. It's less about, you know, what didn't change, what, you know, hasn't worked. And I just think it's about what methodology sits alongside this. And I think at the Old Fire Station, we're still figuring out what that methodology is to capture that learning. At the moment, it's done in a far less structured way than storytelling is. So if anyone has any thoughts or ideas on or methodologies that work for them, that kind of uphold some of those principles and approaches to evaluating that I mentioned in the presentation, then they would be very welcomely received.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question, how do you choose who will be a storyteller?
So storytelling, it's a good question. It's opened out to people who've taken part in the project. We do ask particular people as well who we feel have been particularly involved in the project, or have kind of suggested they have things to say about it. You know, they would be approached individually as well, just because we found that actually, you know, while we open things out to people, very often people, it's not until you're asked personally that you necessarily are up for doing this. So maybe something we need to think about is how we do ask everybody more personally to take part. But yeah, it tends to be those people we sense have been very involved in the project in particular, but it's open to all.
Brilliant, thank you. Probably our last question, just for the sake of time. Looking at the current situation we're in and story collecting remotely through digital, a question came in is, have you noticed how people have engaged differently through technology, phone, etc., versus collecting stories in person?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really different experience. I think in some ways I've been quite you know, surprised to see the level of connection people can build up over Zoom and over the phone. I think maybe sometimes there's something about being in your own home and speaking to somebody in their own home that's almost can be quite intimate, and you know, you can create a kind of sense of a comfortable environment in which to speak. But it is just harder, it's less controlled, you know, internet's cut in and out. There are distractions such as looking at yourself, talking on the screen. So it's definitely been, it's more of a challenge, you know, and obviously, you know, I think still our preference would be to be able to do these things in person. But, you know, right now we're finding that it still feels like it's working, doing it over Zoom, and I think it'll be really interesting, you know, by kind of mid or next week or very soon we'll have our first round of stories collected from the Oxford Together project, and it'll be really interesting to see if they feel different and whether that's anything to do with the way they were collected.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. So that wraps up the Q&A from today's webinar. Sarah, if you're all right to just share your screen again so we can see the last slide. We really hope that you all found it really interesting with us sharing our experience of this methodology. Bear with me, my screen's just... Ooh. There we go. So like Sarah said, we are currently working with Oxford Hub collecting stories around the aid supplied in Oxford during COVID, which is really interesting for us because it is the first time that we are doing it outside of our building. We're also looking at different ways of story collecting and different methods of sharing the stories in a more creative way. So that's what we're working on at the moment. But that does bring us to the end of today. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your brilliant presentation. Thank you to Simon, Liam and Renata for your contributions as well. Of course, thank you to Anne Perry for your constant support through this evaluation process. And thank you to our colleague Alex, who has been busy behind the scenes managing all the technology of running a webinar, which is not an easy job. And thank you to all of you for joining us and contributing to the session today. It's been really interesting. We have recorded it and we'll send it out to everyone so that you can share it with colleagues and anyone who might be interested. And at the same time, we'll send out the answers to the questions that we didn't get a chance to go through. Again, read the guide as some of the answers may well be in there, but we will send around some answers after this as well. Any burning questions or feedback, you can get in touch using the email address on your screen now. If you found this useful and interesting, then please do donate through our website. And that brings us to the end. So thank you all so much, and we hope you have a lovely rest of your day.